Good morning. I'm Carlota, and I am going to be presenting today for VirtuEL on how to get students to use academic language in the classroom. I'm just going to give you guys maybe a few minutes to join me, maybe just a minute, because I'm afraid I'm going to run out of time, and I don't want to. So I'm going to try and be interactive by answering any of your questions and concerns on Twitter. So if you want to use the hashtag VirtuEL17, I can find you, or I will be displaying my Twitter username here in a few minutes, and you can just send me a message. All right, so I am going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to, I'm sorry I can't be fancy like Nancy. Don't know how to put my little face down there while I'm presenting. So I will come back and you'll see my face in some of these instances because there are some things that I physically want to show you that I did with some of my students. But I'm going to go ahead and screen share my presentation with you guys. All right. All right, so engaging students in academic language. Again, I have the hashtag there, VirtuEL17, and then my Twitter username is @Carlota_Holder. So I've got some objectives for us today. I want us to be able to discuss the importance of content vocabulary, Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports. And our content objective today will be, you should be able to analyze the importance of activities and supports that provide students the opportunity to swirl. If you don't know what swirl means, I promise you'll know here in a few minutes. So just to start out, right now, I just finished my first year as EL coordinator at Enlace Academy. I was repping our t-shirt there a minute ago. And I'm also one of the master teachers as we are adapting the TAP model for instruction. So I just finished, I believe, my ninth year of teaching. Before being a coordinator at Enlace, I was an EL teacher in Warren Township for grades 5 through 8. And then before that, I was in Lawrence at Lawrence Township, a bunch of different schools, and my experience was K-8. I'm also bilingual, soy panameña, and that's just kind of what brought me into this professional area of mine. So I am a first-generation Panamanian American, and I was an EL student myself back in the day, but I was the only one. We went and visited my mother's family in Panama before I started kindergarten. I forgot how to speak English because we were there for 6 months, and when I started kindergarten, it was the first year that school was open, and I was the only student in the entire school that could not speak English. So naturally, I had no choice but to learn English by socialization. They did put me kind of in a SPED program to give me extra support, and there was a teacher who's now one of my mother's like best friends who would just come and work with me because she also knew Spanish. So I learned it back very quickly though, because I never had any other opportunities to use it in school. So I'm just kind of curious, who are you? What do you teach? Maybe you're not an EL teacher, maybe you're a social studies or science teacher, and you know what, I applaud you for attending our VirtuEL because we need other content area teachers to be knowledgeable on how we can service these students. And what kind of instruction does your school implement? Do you use sheltered, structured, push in, pull out, dual language, etc.? Okay. So excited to see you guys on Twitter. Trying to see if I have any responses. Well, I'm sure I will later, and I will look into those. So, I am going to kind of use some components of sheltered instruction to explain kind of how I went about the thinking process and creating some of the supports in my classroom. So, first, I'm going to build your background. It is essential that students acquiring English have multiple daily opportunities to practice and apply what they are learning, right? If they're not using English in the classroom, they're not going to learn it. But this goes beyond just social English. This is academic English. If they aren't using academic English in the classroom, how can they compete with their native English peers? They need academic English to be highly educated, and academic English grows each year. Sometimes I feel like an EL teacher, we have to catch on so many years of academic English because it's ignored. So when I'm talking about English most of the time here, I am referring to academic English. And if you're not sure what that is, I'm going to explain that to you too. So what does swirling mean or stand for you? If you attended any of Andrea's and Maria's PD sessions or conferences, I'm sure you probably already have an idea. So you can answer this question on our chat or on Twitter using VirtuEL. Oh, yay, we have some local people. I love it. All right, so think about this. What does swirling mean or stand for to you? All right, swirling. Do you swirl in your classroom every day? I want to make a meme that says like, but do you swirl, bro? We use that. We use bro a lot in my house with 2 boys. So swirling is speaking, writing, interacting, reading, and listening. I added that interacting part in there because students it's really important that they're interacting with each other, not just with the teacher. A lot of times they're like, yeah, they're interacting. They talk with me at small group. That's not the same thing. They need to be interacting with each other with academic language, all right? So language skills need to be developed in conjunction with one another because they are interrelated and integrated naturally. Practice in one area will promote development in the other area. So how many times are we getting our students to speak first? Because once they can speak in English, then we can have them write it down on paper, right? We develop one area, it develops the others. The same thing goes to listening and reading. I can't express how many times I'm trying to teach teachers, model the reading so that they're listening to you. Eventually, they're going to be able to read it, right? We can't just expect them to do these things overnight. It's also easier to connect abstract and concrete concepts when all language processes are incorporated and integrated during practice and application. So that's why a lot of times I'm asking my teachers, did you swirl in your classroom today? Were your students speaking? Were they writing? Were they interacting with each other? Did they read something? Did they listen to something, right? To be really meaningful in planning activities that include all of these components. So how can we do this? This is your responsibility as a teacher. Teachers need to provide scaffolds for students to use. And these scaffolds need to be available and visible so that they can use them when they're talking, when they're interacting with each other, when they're reading, writing, and listening to content instruction. It's something there for them to refer to. And as teachers, we need to hold ourselves accountable to using that academic language during instruction, always. And teachers need to make sure that students have adequate time to practice with that scaffold. The only time a scaffold should ever be taken away is during the assessment. When you're assessing them to see whether or not they understand your content, that's when you would take it away. But we need lots and lots of practice. I also want to touch on the importance of collaborating with content teachers or co-teachers. right? Sometimes we need their help and their expertise to make these scaffolds. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more when I talk about my examples that you've probably seen this week floating around Twitter. Oh, you guys are so awesome. I got to mention my hashtag ELs_can. So if you look at this hashtag on Twitter, you're going to see lots of examples of things that ELs can do. And I put this here because ELs can learn academic language. You just have to provide them the support in the practice to learn it. Here's a nice visual for you. So my school, we follow an I do, we do, you do model. So I model, teacher models, that's what I do. But then students need to, we do it, 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 we do it. They need to practice. It's not just one we do it and then you assess them. They have to practice. And during that practice, they have to swirl. They should be using academic vocabulary while speaking, listening, exposed to it in readings, and using it in their writing. If we really want students to learn and know these words, content words, we need to set the expectations for them to use them. And we also do that by setting the example. So a little about academic vocabulary. I'm going to shout out to Emily because I ran this with her a few nights ago, and she goes, I really think you need to include something about academic vocabulary because some people may not even know what that is. So it was great feedback, Emily. So academic vocabulary are words that are used in academic dialogue and text. It's not found in informal conversational settings, and it's mostly found in classrooms and professional areas, and it increases with each grade level. It's more of our tier 2 and tier 3 words. So here's an example of tier 2 words. Those are the general academic words. These are the words that students are going to find on high stakes tests, and they need to know what they mean. So like connection, demonstration, analyze, summarize, those are all tier 2 words. You see them in multiple grade levels, right? And you see them on tons of assessments. Tier 3 is content or domain specific words, spectrometer, bayonet, equilateral, your science words, your math words, your social studies words, but they're specific to certain units of study, right? And you don't use those in everyday life. Not sure I even know what a spectrometer is, so I can't even use that as an example. But clearly we're not going to say, oh, I used my bayonet the other day, right? Nope, those are old. Okay, moving on. Trying to look at my Twitter at the same time and make sure I'm not going over on time. So you may have seen some of these supports floating on Twitter recently. These are Simon Says, Content Says, so you can see that they're very different. So the last school that I was at, I wasn't always in content classrooms, and I wasn't in the same classroom every week. I was spread pretty thin, and so I had a certain schedule for one week and another schedule for another week, and me and my assistant, we would flip-flop. So it only allowed me or an assistant to be there every other week. So this was I came up with this idea, Virginia Rojas, if you've never heard her speak or gone to one of her conferences, she's great and hilarious. And this is also in Andrea's book. I don't know which book it is. She has some examples of it, and I believe it's from Virginia Rojas, but Common Core for the Not So Common Learner. And so I read that book, I saw a PD with Virginia, and I was like, oh, I could use this as a way to support my students when I'm not there. So with the collaboration of their social studies teacher and their science teacher, I was able to make these. And I emailed them ahead of time. And on the curriculum map, I believe these vocabulary words are there, so I already had an idea of what those words already were. And I emailed them to see if my Simon Says words were appropriate. And then I went on to create these visuals. And as you see, sometimes you can include pictures. In the Simon Says Ancient Civilization Says, I included pictures. So the Simon Says are more modern visuals, and the ancient ancient civilization visuals mirror that time span so that they could see what we were talking about. But I also want to go on to say that although I made these to support students in the classroom, I would use these to help myself, because my area of expertise is English language learners, not science or social studies. So these were a nice reference for me to use as well, especially that science ones. And then it increases my use of using the content-specific vocabulary in class. And my hope was also that it would assist my teachers in using that content-specific vocabulary in class. Here are two more. I'm sure you saw floating around Twitter again this week. Simon Says and TED Talk Says, and then Simon Says and US History Says. And I'm just going to give you a little background information on the Simon Says, TED Talk Says. So one of my really good friends and past co-teacher and I decided to do TED Talk Tuesdays. We felt it was important to expose argumentative elements weekly to our students so that they had plenty of practice. We also did TED Talk Tuesdays to practice in the domain of listening. This also gave them opportunities to talk about higher level nonfiction topics. Every Tuesday during TED Talks, we'd make sure to have our poster posted, and students would fill out an organizer for the TED Talk. If you're looking for an organizer, there are plenty of free ones if you Google it, and it asks students to identify these things. But if you have a difficult time finding it, you could just email me and I can send it to you as well. So most of the times we chose these TED Talks, and then other times we let them choose. And sometimes we failed, like, oh, we thought this would be really interesting and they didn't like it. And other times, they had some really meaningful conversations about it. But we did this because of argumentative writing. And these were things that they needed to understand before they actually got to the writing part, right? So they were able to listen to these different things that they would also eventually be reading in argumentative articles and eventually writing themselves. So we were just kind of building up that capacity of argument vocabulary. And as you see again on the right, I have my Simon Says, US History Says. And, I can't tell you how many times I'm in classrooms and I just hear teachers use those Simon Says vocabulary. And when I ask them, like, why are you doing that? And, well, I want them to understand what I'm saying, which I understand, but they're not going to move if those are the only words that we're using. We have to use the Union, the Confederacy, seceded, ammunition. These are words that they need to know, they need to understand, because they can be successful and they can learn these words. But we must be the examples for these students in putting them into action. All right. Well, my Twitter is going pretty crazy over here, guys. I'm going to show you another example. So this is recently this year when I went into a 4th grade classroom to support them. And I'm going to exit out of here and take you to this one. So with this lesson, we decided to use we decided to use this as a presentation, Simon Says, Science Says, for electricity. So each day we would introduce a certain amount of words, and then students would have to fill out an organizer. And I'm going to go over here. Tan is telling me that some of you are chatting with me on YouTube Live. So let's see if I can get there and answer any of your questions. Oh, great. You guys are awesome. I love this. Okay, going back. So I want to show you guys what I made. So this was for a 4th grade science class. And what I did was I gave everybody a mail envelope because we were doing electricity. And so they're going to put all their unit stuff in here. And for Simon Says, Science Says, I wanted students to have it like personally. So with these anchor charts, you could print them out and then have them glue them in an interactive notebook, and then they personally have them if you don't want to hang them up in the classroom. Because believe it or not, I did have some teachers who were refusing to hang some of these things up. And I was like, but it helps them. I mean, you just got to do what you got to do when you're co-teaching with other teachers. So here's a Simon Says, Science Says, and it's a little interactive. It's a little flip book. So as you can see here, I have all the Simon Says written here. Okay, so all the basic words. And then I have the Science Says is blank here. And so daily, when we would present the vocabulary words, I would have the students write the words here. Okay, so think about it. Why did I have them write the Science Says words here and not the Simon Says? Why do you guys think I did that? Anybody? All right, so I'm going to share with you. I wanted them to have the Science Says because I wanted them to write that content academic vocabulary. This was what I wanted them to know. This is what I wanted them to pay attention to. This is written here because this is what I want them to know what it means, right? So every day they would write their words, and then I would ask them, okay, what are tiny particles? And then they would say atoms, right? Every single day they were saying those academic vocabulary words, right? Because that's what I wanted them to focus on. I made that my focus. And let me see if I'm going to share my screen again with you guys. Right? So here they are. So this was like Monday, Tuesday, you know, we were adding on to the list every day, and it was also going along with our reading instruction. But I made sure that they focused on these science words. Okay. I see a lot of requests on Twitter to share my slides with you guys. And I believe what I can do is on the YouTube page, I can put them somewhere there. But I definitely don't have a problem sharing them with you. So if you want to reach out to me too, and I can personally share it with you. I'll have my email here at the end. Okay. So how do these benefit students? Right? So students always have something to refer to during instruction, whether they're listening, reading, writing, or speaking. Students can learn the content-specific vocabulary. So more of those tier 3 words. It also reinforces teachers to use the content-specific vocabulary during instruction, which in turn, of course, is going to benefit our students. Again, I would just want to emphasize that we must, if as a teacher we are not using the content-specific vocabulary that we're trying to teach our students, then they will never understand it. And that goes for all students. That's just not English language learners. So we must model this example in our classrooms and encourage students to use that content-specific vocabulary too. If you hear them using the Simon Says, you can prompt them to the anchor chart to use higher vocabulary. I had a student one time who said we were really looking deep into pictures of a war, and they said they called the carriages a car. I was like, well, but is that really a car? Right? Like carriage was a specific word back then during that time of the war. And so just told her to look at the anchor chart. And she's like, oh yeah, a carriage, right? There's nothing wrong with that, prompting students to use those words. What would be even cooler is if our students prompted us to use those words. All right, moving on to practice and application. Students have a greater chance of mastering content, concepts, and skills when they are given multiple opportunities to practice in relevant, meaningful ways. When this practice includes hands-on experiences, including manipulatives, practice sessions are enhanced. So when you hear the word manipulatives, what comes to mind? What are you thinking about when you hear manipulatives? And I am going to get out of my screen share for a minute and see. Katie, I do allow newcomers to add their native language. 110%. Never say no to using the native language. Translanguaging is so powerful. All right, anybody have any ideas on what comes to mind when you use the word manipulatives? All right, well, usually when we hear the word manipulatives, we think about the manipulatives we use during math instruction, right? Hundreds blocks, tens blocks, ones counting blocks, counting bears, shapes, counters, fake money. Most manipulatives are related to math. So what does that look like with language? And I'm going to show you some of those examples, but I want to let you know that definition I found from dictionary.com says, usually manipulatives, any of various objects or materials that students can touch and move around in order to help them learn mathematical and other concepts. Even that definition says math, but we can use that in a lot more areas than just math. So why use hands-on materials and or manipulatives? More rapid progress, mastering content objectives. It can be organized, created, counted, classified, stacked, experimented with, observed, rearranged, dismantled, etc. Again, this is something that helps connect abstract concepts with concrete experiences. It reduces the language load for students. And beginners can still participate and demonstrate what they are learning. And referring back to the SIOP model, hands-on materials and our manipulatives is feature 20 of the SIOP model. So I'm going to show you some of these hands-on materials and manipulatives that I have made in my years of teaching and how I've used them with my instruction. So on the left, these are made to help students identify which specific textual evidence match the specific detail. So it really downsized the text so that they were just focusing on specific parts of the text. And then on the right are the elements of persuasive writing. So if you've seen the We video floating around, you may have seen students doing argumentative writing, and I also did an activity similar to that, but for persuasive writing. So students had to put these in order of how we expected them to write in that persuasive format. All right. Again, some more questions. I'm trying to get you guys thinking on this Saturday morning. When you think about teaching writing, what other language domains do you consider? How do you model writing an essay? Have you been in a classroom where a teacher just gives students a rubric for a writing assignment and asks them to just get to work? So basically, like, get out your pencils, start writing, or get out your computer, start typing. And what mentor texts do you use to teach these things? And I am going to go over here to our chat feature. All right, I probably need to get on Twitter. Okay. So I'm asking these questions because it's something serious to consider when thinking about the writing process. And these questions are seldom asked, and teachers assume students are capable of just taking a pencil or a keyboard and can begin writing. And that's not the EL reality. And I think what really inspired me to think more about this was my newcomer students. When it came time to do an essay, and teachers would be like, or to do any kind of writing, and sometimes teachers would be like, oh, they can't do it, they can just do something else. Like, it's not acceptable. We're not going to make the academic gains with these students that we need if we're using that as an excuse. So I decided to think about writing in the other language domains. Okay, and that leads us to comprehensible input. A culturally responsive teacher takes into account the unique linguistic needs of English learners and modifies teaching accordingly, right? It's exactly what I did. I thought about those newcomers and how they were just, oh, they can't do it, they won't. Was not acceptable for me. So I had to modify what other students were doing to get my newcomer students to also participate in these same things and assignments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you to my WeVideo account because I have time for this. Right, I was going to run out of time. And we're going to watch this argumentative essay activity. All right, here you go. All right, so I wanted to show you guys that before I start telling you what the planning process was behind that. So first, my co-teacher and I had to establish a format, right? And this could look different with different teachers. Because I definitely have worked with teachers where I'm like, oh, well, we did this format and they want to do a different one. It's fine, right? I'm going to do whatever I can to support my co-teacher. So then we needed a topic to argue, right? And we wanted to find something that interests students. So at the time, Justin Bieber was popular. So we used Scholastic Scope. If you don't get Scholastic Scope or Scholastic Action, I definitely recommend it. And they had an argument article on whether or not Justin Bieber should be deported because he's from Canada. And so, you know, we realized that for an argument essay, there is research involved, which is reading. So we printed copies of the article for students to read ahead of time because that's where claims and text evidence would come from. So we found the topic, and then I wrote a mock argument essay using the format that we decided on because I wanted to model this format. It would have been nice if I could have just used the Scholastic Scope article, but it was like 3 pages long. It wasn't what I was actually expecting my students to do. I wanted them to do a 5-paragraph essay and in a certain model. So the article has basically like an article about pro and then an article about con. So that's kind of why we used it to find our evidence, but it didn't model essay writing for us. So next I had to write it using the information from the article, following the format that we established. And I did that so that this way students would be able to identify those claims and text evidence. So they'd be able to see it in the writing and be like, oh yeah, I remember reading it here, as you saw in some of the video. And so then I had to divide the essay up into its elements. And so that meant I had to cut up my articles, or I'm sorry, my mock essay. And then I also had to create vocabulary cards with the elements. And we had to create a lesson that teaches the vocabulary of the elements of argument writing. So in the video, you saw that they had an organizer, and we gave students a note-taking page while we were teaching the vocabulary of the elements so that they could refer back to that when they were going to do this activity. So here's the comprehensible input when we were teaching it. So we started the lesson by teaching the elements of argument writing, so what those vocabulary words meant, what was a hook, an intro, a claim, evidence, supporting details, explanation, counter-argument, rebuttal, conclusion, etc. Then we had students read the article that we used to write our model. When students are reading the article, you could provide directions to them to highlight different claims and evidence and that support those details or those claims. And I would model this reading the first few paragraphs and highlighting like, oh, well, here's a claim and I find evidence for this claim here. You can model that. When students are done reading, you would put them into groups. Now, remember, at this time, whatever visual support that you have would be up in your room for your students to refer to. During this group time, teachers would monitor and walk around to view their interaction and step in when needed. So the first thing that we gave to them while they were in groups is the element cards, and I asked them to put them in the modeled format. I wanted to put them in order. What goes first? Okay, well, first goes my hook, and then my intro, and then my claim, right? That's a process of writing that students need to know. This is why they can't just be handed a computer or a pencil and begin writing. They need to know that format. So first wanted to make sure everybody knew the format that it was supposed to go in. And then when they had successfully put the elements in the right format, we gave them the pieces of the essay to match them. So next came the matching. They're reading all the different pieces and they were out of order and they had to match them up with the elements of vocabulary. And since you are putting these vocabulary words in students' hands, literally, you will hear them use them in conversation. Oh, well, this is the hook because, or this is a rebuttal. Oh, this evidence supports that. You can hear them using those words in their group, which is pretty amazing. And then lastly, once they had everything in order, for this video lesson, we had students practice using ellipses because that was an 8th grade standard for us, so it may not be for you. But you could have students copy the essay or do the same. And we gave them an organizer so that they were putting those different parts of the essay with the right parts of the element. And so as I was doing this, it's like, this is something that like my newcomers can, you know, still be a part of and kind of learn. They can be in these groups. And probably instead of having them write a 5-paragraph essay, maybe I would give them one. And their assessment would be, okay, how about you try and put this in order? You know, maybe not exactly a newcomer, but for our lower level students, it's still something that they can do. And then they can copy the writing, because at that level, copying the writing is writing. Sometimes we get newcomer students who don't even know how to write, right? So we have to be really mindful in creating these activities that support all of our students. I need to go to Twitter because I haven't checked in on you guys, see if anybody's asking some questions. You guys are funny. Okay, so let's recap. In order to fully practice language, students should use it while speaking, writing, reading, and listening, right? They should be swirling, right? They should be interacting with each other and doing all of these things. And as teachers, we must provide or create activities or supports to encourage this. To put academic language and vocabulary in students' hands to encourage them to use it in context, right? We need to do that. We need to put that language in their hands, right? So that they're literally using it. So it seems a little bit more natural to them. And as teachers, we need to model the use of academic language daily. So that is all I have for you guys today. I am ending like right on time. This is amazing. If you have any questions, you can find me at Carlota_Holder on Twitter. And then this is my personal email, so I should be able to hear from you no matter what. I, of course, referenced a lot of my information from the SIOP model. If you are going to be at Newport Beach in about, I think it's like 2 weeks, I will also be presenting there a little bit more in depth on using interactive manipulatives with writing. And I'll be referring a lot to Jeff Swires as well, and how you can really use speaking to assist students in their writing. And then credit, special thanks to Slides Carnival for creating these slides. Let me go back here, and I'm going to stop screen sharing. So I hope you guys enjoyed my presentation, and I am going to look at this chat right now and see if I can answer anybody's questions. If anybody has any questions, I would love to answer them right now, but I know that Larry is getting ready to start his presentation, so you guys might be leaving for that. All right, well, thanks for joining me today. Hashtag VirtueEL. This was a great experience for me. I feel like my PLN has made me grow so much professionally in this past year than I could ever imagine. So I hope you'll join us on Twitter. Join our PLN. You'll learn a lot, promise. All right, adios. Thank you.